The conference hall stretched like a cathedral of glass and steel, its transparent walls offering a panoramic view of New Geneva's sprawling cityscape. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the edge of the human delegation, her posture relaxed yet alert, like a soldier at ease but never off duty. The morning sun cast long shadows across the polished floor, creating geometric patterns that seemed to shift with each movement of the assembled delegates. Around the crescent-shaped table, representatives from 17 different species maintained their careful distances. The Corvani delegation clustered near the eastern wall, their reptilian features catching the light as they whispered among themselves in clicking, staccato tones. Across from them, the ethereal Lycians floated inches above their seats, their translucent forms shimmering like heat mirages. Between these two extremes sat the others, traders, explorers, survivors, each species carved by their home worlds into something unique yet recognizably sentient. But all eyes kept drifting to the Vorthok. They dominated the northern section of the hall like storm clouds gathering on a horizon. 7 feet tall, covered in midnight black scales that seemed to absorb light, the Vorthok had earned their reputation as the galaxy's apex predators. Through millennia of conquest, their home world, Keth Prime, was a fortress of volcanic glass and iron where only the strongest survived to adulthood. General Crix, their delegation leader, bore scars across his massive frame, each one a trophy from a defeated enemy. Elena had studied the files. The Vorthok didn't negotiate, they tested. They didn't respect words, they respected strength. For 300 years, they had maintained their position on the Galactic Council through a simple philosophy: prove your worth or become prey. Today, humanity would face that test. The humans arrived with soft words and softer hearts. Crix rumbled, his voice carrying across the hall like distant thunder, his yellow eyes fixed on Elena with predatory interest. They speak of peace while their worlds burn with their own violence. What place do children have among hunters? Elena stepped forward, her movement fluid and economical. She wore no armor, carried no visible weapons, just a simple gray diplomatic uniform that emphasized her humanity. Rather than hiding it, her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, revealing the lean lines of her face and the steady intelligence in her brown eyes. "We come not as children, General Crix," she replied, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's acoustics. "We come as partners. Earth has much to offer the Council: our adaptability, our innovation, our perspective shaped by diversity." A sound like grinding metal emerged from Crix's throat. Vorthok laughter. "Pretty words. Your species survived by hiding in caves while apex predators ruled your world's surface. You conquered through tools and tricks, not strength. What happens when your tools fail?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Elena felt the weight of 17 species' attention, their calculations and judgments pressing against her consciousness. Some, like the Corvani, watched with nervous anticipation. Others, like the trade-focused merchants of Altair, seemed more interested in the economic implications than the display of dominance. But Elena's attention remained fixed on Crix. She had trained for this moment in facilities buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, sparring with the finest human warriors, studying combat footage from 100 different species. She had memorized Vorthok physiology, learned their pressure points, understood their weaknesses. More importantly, she had learned to read their culture. The Vorthok respected strength, but they feared unpredictability. They ruled through intimidation, but they had never encountered prey that invited the hunt. "Tools and tricks have served us well," Elena said, taking another step forward. The movement placed her within striking distance of Crix, a position that would normally trigger every survival instinct evolved into a prey species. But you're right to question their reliability. Perhaps a demonstration would be more illuminating than words. Crix's eyes narrowed, pupils dilating as his predatory instincts engaged. Around the hall, delegates shifted uneasily. The Lycians began to glow with agitation, their forms flickering like candle flames in wind. The Corvani's scales darkened to deep emerald, their species equivalent of holding their breath. A demonstration. Crix rose from his seat, his massive frame unfolding. Like a mechanical instrument of war, you would face a Vorthok in combat, little human. Elena smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both warm and utterly cold. I would face reality, General. And reality has taught me that the strongest predators aren't always the ones who strike first. The hall fell silent except for the distant hum of the city beyond the glass walls. In that silence, Elena could hear her own heartbeat, steady and controlled. She could sense the moment crystallizing around them, all the careful diplomacy and political maneuvering condensing into something primal and absolute. Crix took a step forward, his claws extending with audible clicks against the floor. Then, "Show me, human. Show me what reality looks like when it meets a Vorthok." Elena nodded once, her stance shifting almost imperceptibly. To untrained eyes, she simply stood straighter. But her positioning now optimized her balance, her muscle tension, her lines of movement. She was no longer just a diplomat in a conference room. She was a weapon choosing its moment to fire. The silence stretched like a taut wire between them, vibrating with potential energy. Elena could feel the collective held breath of the assembled delegates, their species' various forms of anxiety manifesting in the space around her. The Lycian's luminescence pulsed in rapid, shallow rhythms. The Corvani's scales rippled in waves of color change. Even the normally stoic merchants of Altair leaned forward in their seats, their compound eyes reflecting fractured images of the impending confrontation. General Crix circled her slowly, his massive form moving with the fluid grace of an apex predator. Each step was deliberate, calculated to project dominance and inevitable victory. His claws scraped against the polished floor with each movement, leaving tiny furrows in the synthetic material, a reminder of what those same claws could do to flesh and bone. "Your species fascinates me, human," Crix rumbled, his voice a low frequency that seemed to resonate in Elena's chest cavity. "You evolved alongside creatures that could tear you apart, great cats, bears, wolves, yet you survived. How?" Elena turned to track his movement, her own steps economical and precise. She maintained the same casual distance, neither retreating nor advancing, simply existing in the space with a confidence that bordered on the supernatural. "We learn to think beyond the immediate moment," she replied. "Predators hunt, prey adapts, but humans, we plan." Planning. Crix's laugh was like rocks grinding together, a luxury of the weak. In the moment of the hunt, there is only tooth and claw, speed and strength. Your planning means nothing when my jaws close around your throat. Around the hall, the other delegates watched with varying degrees of fascination and horror. Ambassador Tice of the Corvani delegation clutched her ceremonial staff, so tightly her knuckles showed white through her scales. The Lycian envoy had dimmed to barely visible, their form retreating into near transparency as their species' fear response engaged. But the Vorthok delegation watched with different eyes entirely. Lieutenant Vex, Crix's second, observed with the clinical interest of a scientist studying a specimen. Captain Drax leaned forward, his scarred features arranged in something approaching curiosity. They weren't watching a hunt, they were watching an education. "You speak of the moment of the hunt," Elena said, her voice carrying a note of genuine interest. "But what happens after, when the prey is gone? When the territory is empty, when there's nothing left to dominate?" For the first time, Crix's steady circling faltered. The question seemed to strike something unexpected in his psychology. The strong survive. The weak are consumed. This is the natural order. Natural, yes, but sustainable. Elena shifted her weight slightly, a movement so subtle that only trained observers would notice how it optimized her center of gravity. On Earth, we learned something interesting about apex predators. Remove them from an ecosystem, and the prey animals multiply beyond the environment's capacity to support them. Add too many apex predators, and they eliminate their own food source. Balance isn't weakness, General. It's survival. Crix stopped his circling, facing her directly across the space that separated them. The distance was perhaps 8 feet, close enough for his enhanced musculature to cover in a single leap, close enough for his claws to reach her before she could react with merely human reflexes. "Philosophy from prey," he growled. "Let me teach you about reality." The attack came without warning, a blur of midnight scales and flashing claws that crossed the distance between them. In less than a second, Crix's massive form uncoiled like a striking serpent, his jaws opening to reveal rows of serrated teeth designed by evolution to tear through armor and bone alike. Elena didn't dodge. Instead, she did something that violated every instinct evolved into prey species across the galaxy. She stepped forward into the attack, her left arm rising to meet Crix's descending jaws. The impact was tremendous. Crix's teeth, each one the size of Elena's thumb, punched through the fabric of her diplomatic uniform and into the flesh beneath. Blood welled immediately, running in crimson streams down her arm and spattering onto the pristine floor of the conference hall. But Elena's face remained utterly calm. She looked directly into Crix's yellow eyes, her expression serene despite the pain that must have been coursing through her nervous system. Around them, the assembled delegates recoiled in shock and horror. Several of the Corvani delegation cried out in their clicking language. The Lycians flickered like dying stars. Crix's pupils dilated with confusion. This wasn't how prey behaved. Prey screamed. Prey struggled. Prey died quickly and missily, adding to the predator's reputation and psychological dominance. Prey didn't stare back with eyes like winter frost and speak in voices steady as stone. "I told you we learned to plan beyond the immediate moment," Elena said, her words slightly muffled by the massive jaws clamped around her arm, but still perfectly audible. To every delegate in the hall, "This moment right now, this is what we planned for." Crix's confusion deepened, and in that confusion, Elena saw the opening she had been waiting for. Not a gap in his physical defenses, but a crack in his psychological armor. The moment when the apex predator began to question whether he was still at the top of the food chain. That was when she moved. Elena's right hand moved with surgical precision, her fingers finding the nerve cluster just behind Crix's jaw hinge with the accuracy of a trained anatomist. The pressure point she struck was a vulnerability that existed in all bilateral vertebrates, a spot where ancient evolution had prioritized jaw strength over protection, leaving a crucial neural pathway exposed. Crix's massive form convulsed as the nerve disruption sent cascading signals through his nervous system. His jaw muscles, locked in their crushing grip round Elena's arm, suddenly went slack. His legs, designed to support 7 feet of apex predator, trembled and lost coordination. But Elena wasn't finished. As Crix stumbled backward, she moved with him, her free hand finding his wrist and applying a joint lock that leveraged his own, falling weight against the mechanical limits of his skeletal structure. The technique was ancient, older than spaceflight, older than written language, refined by centuries of human martial arts, and perfected through careful study of Vorthok physiology. Crix hit the conference room floor with a sound like a falling tree. Elena rode the impact down, maintaining her control of his arm while positioning herself at an angle that maximized her leverage and minimized his ability to counterattack. Her wounded arm throbbed with each heartbeat, but her grip remained steady, her technique flawless. The hall erupted in chaos. Half the delegates surged to their feet, their various species fight-or-flight responses triggering simultaneously. The Corvani delegation backed against the eastern wall, their scales shifting through rapid spectrums of distress colors. The Lycians blazed like miniature suns, their fear response luminescence filling their section of the hall with harsh white light. But the Vorthok delegation remained seated, watching with expressions that mixed shock, calculation, and something approaching professional interest. "Stop," Crix gasped, his voice strained by pain and the unnatural angle of his trapped arm. "You have made your point." Human Elena's pressure on the joint lock didn't decrease. If anything, she adjusted her position to maintain perfect control as she spoke. "Have I? Because from where I'm positioned, it seems like the lesson has barely begun." She looked up from her prone opponent to address the assembled delegates, her voice carrying clearly despite her awkward position on the floor. Blood from her wounded arm had formed a small pool beneath them, stark red against the pale synthetic flooring. "General Crix asked me what happens when our tools fail," she continued, her tone conversational despite the circumstances. "It's a fair question. Humans have always been tool users. We conquered our world not with claws and fangs, but with leverage and planning and the ability to see 3 moves ahead." She shifted her weight slightly, and Crix's involuntary grunt of pain punctuated her words. But tools aren't just external objects, they're ways of thinking, methods of problem solving. And the most sophisticated tool our species ever developed wasn't the atomic bomb, or the faster-than-light drive. Round the hall, the chaos was beginning to settle into fascinated attention. Even the most frightened delegates found themselves drawn into Elena's impromptu lecture, delivered from a position of absolute physical control over one of the galaxy's most feared warriors. It was the ability to let ourselves be heard in service of a larger strategy, Elena said. Every human parent who takes a punishment meant for their child demonstrates this principle. Every soldier who draws enemy fire to protect their unit understands it. We learn to accept damage in the present to prevent greater damage in the future. Lieutenant Vex of the Vorthic delegation leaned forward, his scarred features intent. You deliberately allowed the general to bite you. I invited it, Elena corrected. There's a difference. General Crix needed to commit fully to his attack for this demonstration to be effective. Half measures wouldn't have conveyed the necessary information. Crix struggled briefly against the joint lock, testing its limits. Elena's grip adjusted automatically, maintaining perfect control while allowing him to explore the boundaries of his situation. What information? He demanded. Elena's smile was visible even from her position on the flora expression that managed to be both gentle and utterly ruthless. That humanity didn't join this council despite our nature. We joined because of it. She released the joint lock and stepped back in a single fluid movement, putting herself beyond Crix's immediate reach, while remaining close enough to re-engage if necessary. The general rolled to his feet with predatory grace, nursing his injured arm while his yellow eyes fixed on her with new understanding. We're not prey pretending to be predators, Elena continued, dabbing at her wounded arm with a medical pad from her uniform's first aid kit. We're not predators pretending to be civilized. We're something else entirely. The hall had gone silent again, but this was a different kind of silence than before. This was the quiet of focused attention, of minds processing new information and recalculating old assumptions. We're survivors, Elena said simply, and survivors do whatever it takes to ensure the survival of what they protect. Sometimes that means hiding in caves until the predators pass. Sometimes it means building tools that can crack planets. And sometimes, she looked directly at Crix, her eyes meeting his without flinching from the predatory intelligence she found there. Sometimes it means letting the predator bite, so they can learn what happens next. General Crix stood motionless for a long moment, his massive form radiating attention that every delegate in the hall could feel like static electricity before a storm. His injured arm hung at his side, not seriously damaged, but serving as a constant reminder of how quickly the situation had shifted beyond his control. Around him, his own delegation watched with expressions that mixed professional assessment with something approaching awe. You studied us, he said finally, his voice carrying none of its earlier mockery. Before you came here, you studied Vorthic anatomy, our fighting techniques, our psychology. Elena nodded while applying pressure to her wounded arm, the medical pad already darkening with absorbed blood. We studied everyone we might encounter in council space. It seemed prudent for 300 cycles. No species has successfully engaged a Vorthic warrior in single combat, Lieutenant Vex observed. From his seat, his tone was clinical, analytical. The techniques you used, they were specifically developed for our physiology. Not developed, Elena corrected, adapted. Humans have been refining joint locks and pressure point attacks for millennia. We simply applied our existing knowledge to new anatomy. She paused, testing the flexibility of her injured arm before continuing. Though I should mention that this particular approach required extensive preparation. Around the hall, delegates began to understand the implications of what they had witnessed. This hadn't been a spontaneous display of combat prowess. It had been a carefully orchestrated demonstration, planned and executed with the same precision that characterized humanity's approach to everything. From stellar engineering to diplomatic protocol, Ambassador Tice of the Corvani delegation found her voice first. You came here expecting violence, she said, her words carrying an accusation that trembled with barely controlled fear. We came here expecting a test, Elena replied. The form that test would take was predictable. She looked toward the Vorthik delegation, her expression respectful but unwavering. General Crix's people have never accepted a new council member without measuring their strength. It would have been naive to assume they would make an exception for humanity. Crix's laugh was different now, still deep and rumbling, but lacking its earlier predatory edge. So you prepared a trap. I prepared a conversation, Elena said, in a language you would understand. The distinction seemed to resonate with something in Crix's psychology. He straightened to his full height, his posture shifting from aggressive dominance to something approaching professional respect. You could have killed me. It wasn't a question, but Elena answered anyway. Yes, why didn't you? Elena's smile was genuinely warm now, free of the cold calculation that had marked her earlier expressions. Because dead predators can't carry messages back to their packs. The words hit the assembled delegates like a physical force. In that simple statement lay the true scope of humanity's strategic thinking. Not just the ability to defeat a single opponent, but the understanding of how that defeat would ripple outward through the complex web of galactic politics. Captain Drax, the most scarred member of the Vorthik delegation, spoke for the first time since the confrontation began. What message? Elena looked around the hall, taking in the faces of 17 different species, each shaped by their own evolutionary pressures and cultural history. Some watched her with fear, others with curiosity, still others with the calculating interest of beings reassessing a potential ally or threat. But humanity doesn't seek to replace the existing power structure, she said. We seek to stabilize it. She gestured toward the massive windows that dominated the eastern wall, beyond which New Geneva's skyline stretched toward distant mountains. Every species in this room evolved to fill a specific niche in their homeworld's ecosystem. Predators, prey, scavengers, builders, each with their own strengths and limitations. But sustainable ecosystems require balance. The Lycian envoy flickered back to visibility, their translucent form shimmering with interest. You speak of the galaxy as an ecosystem, isn't it? Elena asked. Species competing for resources, forming alliances, establishing territories. The same dynamics that shaped evolution on every inhabited world, just playing out on a larger scale. General Crix moved closer, his steps careful and deliberate. The predatory stalking behavior was gone, replaced by something that might have been respect. And what niche do humans claim to fill? Elena's answer came without hesitation. Maintenance. The word hung in the air like a key turning in a lock, opening up new avenues of understanding. Around the hall, delegates began to see the broader implications of what they had witnessed. This hadn't been about proving human strength, it had been about demonstrating human function. Apex predators serve an important role, Elena continued, her voice taking on the cadence of a teacher explaining a complex concept. They control population dynamics, prevent any single prey species from overwhelming the ecosystem's resources. But apex predators also have vulnerabilities. They require large territories, specialized prey, stable environmental conditions. She looked directly at Crix as she spoke, her words clearly intended for him specifically. What happens when those conditions change? When old prey species adapt beyond recognition? When new predators enter the ecosystem? Crix's eyes narrowed, but with thought rather than aggression. The apex predators adapt or die, or Elena said. Quietly, they accept help from species that specialize in adaptation. The silence that followed was profound, filled with the sound of mental gears turning and political calculations being revised. The merchants of Altair began chattering among themselves in their rapid, multitonal language. The Corvani delegation huddled in urgent conference, their scales shifting through spectrums of excitement and uncertainty. But it was Lieutenant Vex who articulated what many of them were thinking. You're proposing a symbiotic relationship, Elena nodded. Mutually beneficial cooperation between species with complementary capabilities. Humans provide adaptive capacity and systematic thinking. Others provide their own specialized strengths. Everyone benefits from the stability that results. General Crix was quiet for a long time, his yellow eyes fixed on Elena with an intensity that would have been threatening in any other context. But now it seemed more like evaluation than predation, a warrior assessing not an enemy, but a potential partner. This demonstration, he said finally, it was not meant to defeat me, no. Elena agreed. It was meant to show you that we could choose not to. The medical bay attached to the New Geneva Conference Center hummed with the quiet efficiency of advanced technology. Elena sat on the edge of an examination table, while a medical drone sealed the puncture wounds on her arm with biocompatible polymer, the process accompanied by a faint tingling sensation as artificial nerve endings wear upon with damaged tissue. General Crix stood nearby, his own injuries being tended by a second drone. The damage to his arm was minimal strained ligaments, minor neural disruption, but the attention to his medical needs sent its own message about human priorities and capabilities. Your species approaches violence like engineers approach a construction project, he observed, watching the drone work with professional interest, calculate loads, identify stress points, apply force precisely where it will have maximum effect. Elena flexed her newly repaired arm, testing the range of motion. The polymer seal was nearly invisible, designed to dissolve as her natural healing processes took over. Violence is a tool, she said. Like any tool, it works best when applied with precision and restraint. Through the medical bay's transparent wall, they could see the conference hall where the other delegates continued their discussions. The formal session had been suspended, while various species representatives consulted with their homeworld governments. But informal conversations filled the space with animated gestures and rapidly shifting body language. They're afraid, Crix noted, his tone neutral but observant. Some of them, Elena agreed. Fear's a natural response to new information. It takes time to process the implications of changed circumstances. Crix's laugh was softer now, lacking the grinding edge that had marked his earlier vocalizations. Changed circumstances. A diplomatic way to describe the complete revision of their assumptions about human capabilities. Elena stood and moved to the wall, looking out at the assembled delegates. The Corvani were still huddled in urgent conference, their scales cycling through rapid color changes. The Lycians flickered in and out of visibility, their agitation visible in the irregularity of their luminescence patterns. But other species showed different responses. The merchants of Altair seemed excited, their compound eyes bright with speculation about new trading opportunities. A delegation of crystalline beings from the Helix Nebula maintained their usual stoic composure, but their formations had shifted into patterns that suggested deep contemplation. What happens now? Crix asked, joining her at the wall. Now we find out whether the demonstration was sufficient, Elena replied. Whether the message was clear enough, convincing enough, to serve its intended purpose. Which was. Elena turned to face him directly, her expression serious, but not unfriendly. To establish that humanity's entry into the Council wouldn't destabilize the existing balance of power, that we represent an opportunity for enhancement rather than replacement. Crix considered this, his scarred features arranging themselves into something approaching thoughtfulness. And if some species remain unconvinced? Elena's smile was gentle but carried undertones that Crix, as an apex predator, recognized immediately. Then we'll have additional conversations, in whatever language proves most effective. The implication hung between them, clear and unmistakable. The demonstration with Crix had been carefully calibrated enough to make the point without causing permanent damage or unrecoverable loss of face. But the human capacity for escalation, if required, had been clearly established. Your people understand power, Crix said after a moment. Not just the application of force, but its strategic deployment, the psychology of dominance and submission. We understand survival, Elena corrected. And we've learned that true survival isn't about being the strongest. It's about being adaptable enough to find solutions that benefit everyone. A soft chime indicated that the medical drones had completed their work. Both Elena and Crix were pronounced fully functional, their injuries reduced to minor inconveniences that would fade within hours as they prepared to return to the conference hall. Crix paused at the door. The other Vorthok will want to test your people as well, he said. Not all of them will be as reasonable as I was. Elena nodded, unsurprised. We expected that. Humans have been preparing for a variety of scenarios. How many of your people can do what you did? The question was casual, but Eleanor recognized its importance. The answer would help determine whether humanity represented a single exceptional individual or a systemic capability that extended across their entire species. All of us, she said simply, in one form or another. Crix's eyes widened slightly. Every human child learns to accept calculated risks in service of larger goals. Every human adult has experienced managing pain, fear, and uncertainty while maintaining focus on strategic objectives. The specific techniques I use today required specialized training, but the underlying principles, she shrugged, they're as fundamental to humanity as hunting instincts are to the Vorthok. They returned to the conference hall to find the atmosphere significantly changed. The earlier chaos had been replaced by focused discussion, as various species began to see opportunities rather than threats in humanity's demonstrated capabilities. Ambassador Tice approached them immediately, her scales now displaying the deep blue patterns associated with formal respect.